Well, with a lot of people, again, you start out you're starting a business and you're early in your career, and that's probably also when you're going to have your young kids. So you've got a very basic estate plan that like we were just talking about, and that's going to cover most everybody. But as you go through life, your kids get older, and presumably your business continues to grow, things become a lot more complex, and then you have to figure out, well, what are you going to do and how are you going to plan to address the business. Some very, very big issues. So you got to deal with all the standard estate planning issues, and then you got to think about, well, a lot of people have, if they're an entrepreneur, if they're self-employed, most of their estate is going to be focused around that business, and then that's going to be the bulk of everything. So what are you going to do with that? Are you going to sell it? Is that the best way to address all the issues, or do you leave it to your spouse? Do you leave it to your kids? And each and every choice and decision has just a ton of different issues that pop up that go with it. So it's never easy, and dealing with business owners, it takes a lot of time to think through what you want to do. And if there's one point that I could certainly drive home, it's in terms of dealing with business owners. It takes a long time to get something together. And usually over that period of time, things change on the ground, so it makes it even more difficult. So it's something you want to start thinking about early in the process.
Well, what comes to mind, have you seen the movie Horrible Bosses?
I have not.
Okay,
no.
well, it's a pretty bad thing to bring up then. Anyways, in the movie, the business owner dies and he leaves it to his son, and his son is this disaster of an owner. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that a lot of people who think it would be a nice gesture to leave their business to their kids really have to balance out the "what am I doing here" factor.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing, balancing it off of selling the business either while you're still alive or even after you've passed away versus passing it on. The first thing you need to think about is there a child who has an interest in being involved in the business? And even if they have an interest in being involved, do they have the skills and the abilities to be able to manage
the business?
Are they capable? Can they manage that business and grow that business? Because that's, especially if you're going to leave the business, say, to all of the kids, and also be used to support a spouse while the spouse is alive, and that business still needs to be running and functioning and throwing off money to take care of the whole family. And if you've designated somebody who is not capable of handling that, clearly you're going to have a huge problem. And you would have been far better off, again, selling the business, even though there's all kinds of issues and problems with selling a business.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis and I were talking about those issues before we came on the air. Lots of issues there, but those are some of the things you kind of have to think about. And other things that come to mind, even if you do have somebody who is capable and is interested in the business, and you're going to leave the business to one person, again, if the business is, say, 80% of your estate, then how are you going to handle the other, say you have one or two other kids? It's going to be a disproportionate inheritance, and how is that going to affect your family going forward?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to try to have people equal things out. How do you go about doing that? And are there resources to be able to do that? And maybe do you need to purchase insurance to make sure that things can get evened out and whatnot? So lots and lots of different things to consider.
I could really see that, because if you're going to give the business to a child or a grown person, mm-hmm. presumably at this point in time, yeah. And they have the ability to run the business, now how does that really make sense for the other child if you're trying to be fair and equitable?
Right.
Because now maybe you've given this person a job with a salary, mm-hmm. and a business with equity, and
right.
Child number two.
What do
right.
they get?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so I mean, if you've got a $5 million business and $1 million house and $1 million retirement account, well, the one child gets a $5 million business and the other kid gets, I guess, the equivalent of roughly $2 million if that's still available. Maybe that's fair, because I mean, some people I have
one kid's got to go to work and the other one's got a house and some cash.
Exactly. Because exactly. Some people say, well, they've been in the business and they've been working at the company for, say, 10 years before all this happens, so they've earned it. They've earned the additional inheritance, so to speak. Maybe that's okay, maybe that's not. I think that can always...
It depends on if the kid who's not getting the business complains or not, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's the other thing, too, is if you're still trying to make sure things are equitably divided and whatnot, but maybe you can't do that, maybe you're going to separate. You're going to leave some of the business to one of the other child as a minority owner. What type of issues does that come with it? Now, if you've got a minority business owner, they can always make a lot of noise. They're not getting enough distributions. Why aren't they getting paid enough money and everything? And they're constantly making problems and everything. So it can be a whole hornet's nest of different issues.
So when somebody goes in and they make their gifts, or what do you call it? When they're giving the money away after they die, what's that called?
Bequest.
The what?
A bequest.
A bequest. Whatever they're bequesting these on their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Is there room maybe in the will for the reasons? I mean, so it's, hey, Johnny gets this, Sally gets this, but let me at least explain why.
Yeah, certainly there's always
room for that. And I'm gone,
that.
So nobody can argue with me.
Yeah, there's always room for that. You can always add those things in and give some explanation. A lot of people don't necessarily do that. Maybe they do that separately. For some people, they think maybe it's obvious, again, because the child has been working in the business for a number of years and whatnot. And so that's why it seems obvious to them. But yeah, there's certainly room for that, and certainly would not be a bad idea to explain all of that. So those are some various things that you could do.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It seems that would be, depending on, I suppose, your age and if it was like a sudden death or not, that would seem like that maybe would create a smoother transition. Mm-hmm. Although, I guess nobody can argue with you. So
well, that's true. Nobody can argue with you. But again, it's the resentment factor if things aren't relatively equal. And a lot of times, again, insurance is one way to equal things up, but then that can be expensive as well. So that's always a bit of a problem too. So
John Hugg joins us, attorney with Hugg and Associates. John, we have a couple minutes left before we go to break. When should somebody maybe start their estate plan? I mean, is this, if you have a business, mm-hmm. certainly it's something you should be thinking about. As you grow older, mm-hmm. is there a starting point?
Well, I think you should be thinking about it early on. You should always have something in place just in the event that catastrophe does strike, and you want to make sure that in that case, if you're planning early, you should be planning, have your will in place, things like that, and maybe assume that if the kids are still young and whatnot, and or your spouse has no interest in the business or isn't really participating in the business, you want something in place. Sell the business, get the cash from that, distribute that. To your spouse or to your children, things like that. Do that. Make sure that's always in place at any time. In terms of thinking about a transition or a succession, given what I've seen with my clients and dealing with them and how long it takes, I would say start literally like 5 years before you're thinking about retiring, and start thinking about how you want to do this, and start thinking about grooming a successor. Again, if you want your spouse to be involved, bring them on and get them involved. Maybe, like I said, a good 5 years before you're looking to retire. If you're looking at bringing in children, same type of thing. Think long and hard about that. And you might want to think about having them do different roles within the company, minor roles first, and then building their way up to see if they really have the ability to do that. Because if they don't, maybe there's another child that does have a better capacity to do that, and you need enough time for all of that to shake out.
So you do want to start earlier than later. I mean, imagine the earlier you get it on the radar, the more time you have to think about and really drive that home.
Absolutely.